with that, we're gonna move right into our first session. And we really wanted to, again, as part of this project has not been to take on PRRS, right? PRRS is obviously the thing that's had a theme in many of our sessions. One of the things we wanted to talk about is living with PRRS as we looked at potential topics, and we really have three great individuals that are going to talk about this within their production systems. To start off with, we have Dr. Pete Thomas. Pete is the Director of Veterinary Services for Iowa Select Farms. He's a graduate of Iowa State College of Vet Med with a master's in science and preventive medicine and a doctor in veterinary medicine. So with that, we're going to turn things over to Dr. Thomas. And again, the way this session's set up, about 15 minutes each, then we'll have time for a panel and questions at that point. So thank you, Dr. Thomas.
All right, I'll go ahead and get started. Obviously, I do not have the cure for PRRS. I wouldn't be here today. That I can promise you. I'd be somewhere much nicer than Omaha in November. But so the task that we had is best practices for living with PRRS, and sometimes it seems like the goal is hard to distinguish. It's have less PRRS than I do right now, and try harder is kind of the strategy. It's difficult, and I'll maybe share some things that I think, that we're either working on or we've tried, or some things that I've learned, maybe what doesn't work to some extent. But so best practice was living with PRRS is don't live with PRRS. Like, I think that you really have to always be trying to take steps forward. Even if you ever heard that's breaking, every 18 months, to say, well, I can't, I'm just going to live with it because it just breaks again and it just breaks again. You live with poor production, you live with poor health. Next thing you know, you got 2 or 3 or 4 strains that you're dealing with, recombinations and so forth. And so I'll say don't live with PRRS, but in reality, we live with PRRS because our geographical location is very intertwined. We're in Iowa. We have more pigs, as far as I know, than any other producer in the state of Iowa. And Iowa's the most populated pig state in the U.S. So our sow farms, if you look at this map, this would be a representation of all of our farms. The little pigs would be all wean to finish sites, and the big pigs would be sow farms. And so as you can see, our sow farms are right in and amongst the geography of where all of our finishing sites are at, and where other producers have finishing sites as well. And so we've got a lot of disease pressure in our system. So I'll talk a little bit spend a few minutes talking about sow farm management and spend a few minutes talking about wean to finish management. I broke the sow farm management down into a few things that you need to have. Number one, excellent culture biosecurity. So you give yourself some period of time in between outbreaks. You need to have clean gilts. That's a starting point. If you don't start with clean gilts, you don't have. And then also strategies around PRRS elimination and stability in sow farms. So from a biosecurity standpoint, one thing I would say when it comes to biosecurity that I'm a firm believer in, and I think it is the absolute common denominator of having any kind of successful biosecurity program, is less about what the SOP is and more about everybody sings from the same sheet of music. If we all put together a biosecurity program in this room, we would probably have the same number of biosecurity programs as what we have in this room, maybe more. And I think at the end of the day, if I sit with our sow directors and our GDU directors and we come up with our strategy and we say, well, our D&D room is going to be 48 hours, or it's going to be 72 hours, or it's going to be 80 degrees, or it's going to be 85 degrees, or it's 90 degrees, whatever. At the end of the day, we're not probably going to agree on 100%, but we should be able to agree on 90%. And if we go out and my 10% is different from his 10%, and I undermine that by saying, well, you don't have to do that, that was stupid, do it this way, you have people that have no buy-in at the slat level, and you don't get any kind of execution. Everybody needs to understand it, everybody needs to execute it, everybody needs to be singing from the same sheet of music. A couple things we do is my staff, our health service team, we go in, we just finished up going to all of our sow farms and breeding gilt sites and spending the entire day with farm staff get there in the morning when they arrive so you can watch them do the bench entry and enter their lunches and things like that, and stay until the end of the day when they do their dead removal, and do all the processes with them, schedule it on a wean day so you can watch it and answer those questions, meet with lunch. But it gives a day where you're in there with the farm staff doing the tasks, watching them, answering questions. It's not an audit, they're not getting a score, but it's an opportunity to make sure they can get it right before the fall comes. And then video reviews. You can put video camera systems in your farms pretty cheap, and it's an excellent way. We do third party, well, it's our own internal team, but third party from the farm, video reviews, video audits every 6 weeks, watch critical processes. And as you can see, this is an example of a coal sow loadout room, and you can see the disinfectant, but we can watch all those processes and give them pretty real-time feedback, stuff that you can't see when you're on farm doing an on-farm audit. And also the farm managers have access to this. So they've got a maintenance guy showing up, they can flip on that camera and watch that maintenance guy come in their entryway and see what they have with them, see them come over to the bench, those kinds of things. And then facility investment. Like, you got to put your money where your mouth is at some point in time, and you need to have, if we're in Iowa, with our density, filtration is important. Having loadout rooms or transition rooms are important. Having good personnel entry locations, UV chambers, and designated tool sets, welders, whatever it is, so we're not bringing things between farms. Making that investment in the things that are important is critical. Clean gilts. So from 2020 to 2023, before 2020, we had average of about 6,000 or 7,000 gilts a year that broke with PRRS in southern Iowa. And during that 4-year stretch, we broke 25,000 to 35,000 gilts a year. The swine density changed a little bit down there. The health of the other producers in the area changed. And we had gilt sites with other producers having barns within 2 miles, 3 miles. And we, with the same biosecurity and the same people, we were not able to get the same results. And we broke multiple sow farms or breeding gilt sites. Sometimes with one gilt site would break 3 sites because we would miss it on testing, move the gilts into the farms. We don't have isolation on our facilities. But number one, we got to have clean gilts. So when it comes to that, location is critical. We have essentially moved most of our gilts outside of the state of Iowa into the periphery of the Corn Belt. But I think it's important, if you don't raise your gilts, bring them in as a feeder pig straight in the farm from a clean location, figuring out a way where you can consistently have healthy gilts. If we didn't make that change, we weren't going to get any better as it came to not breaking sow farms from our gilts. From a transportation standpoint, it's the same thing. You need to have clean trucks, clean trailers, clean drivers. That farm needs to be, that trailer, that driver needs to be just as clean, just as the sow farm itself, as the employees of the farm itself. The truck wash is a opportunity for cross-contamination between trucks and drivers and trailers. And so knowing exactly how those are staged, how those are designated, to me is critical. When you get your gilts out of a good location, that transportation has to be key. It's got to be just as good as the rest of the farm. And then think outside the box on testing. We'll hang 4 ropes in each barn or whatever. You can test it as much and as frequently as you want. We just had a farm last week. We tested it, 2 weeks ago, on October 8th, October 9th, and October 13th. 12 ropes in each room. There's 4 in each barn. There's 4 barns, 48 ropes, 96 pens, and we missed it and took it into a farm on the day after that 3rd test. We had moved into farms the previous week. They stayed negative, and then we moved it in, and that was with that many ropes. What I would like to say is think about how you get to the 2020 NCAA football testing program. You got Nick Saban with his COVID mask on, but you remember they were testing every player the day before the game? And then if you tested positive, you didn't get to play. I was a Notre Dame fan, and I can't remember the Clemson quarterback with the long hair, tested positive the day before the Notre Dame Clemson game. Notre Dame won. It was a big deal. But when you think about it like that with your gilts. If they test positive, they don't get to move. And you test every gilt the day. But now, I don't know how we get there. Like I said, we have a very robust testing program, I think. We try to test within, ideally, 24 hours of movements. We have couriers that run same-day samples. Sometimes, we go out to 48 hours, and we test a ton of oral fluids. But I think within your system, think how do I get to that program where I have close to 100% certainty, because if you don't, you'll miss stuff, especially if your gilts aren't in pristine locations, which ours are still not all in pristine locations. And then the long-term impact of PRRS. I do believe you have got to make effort to clean PRRS up, even when you're in Iowa. This is the first 5 sow farms that we had that broke with 144 L1C. And they broke, I took the first 16 weeks after the break out of the data set, because there's really probably nothing you're going to do to impact those losses. But these farms ran endemic for about 12 to 18 months each. And on average, we lost 5 weeks of production, almost 3 PSY out of those farms, just from them endemic as opposed to cleaning them up. So we put gilts in, and we were never truly getting stable, never getting the same baseline level of production that we did before. And I think that's a game changer with some of these new strains of PRRS compared to some of the old ones. We still have some farms that we have not cleaned up because, well, it's kind of a wimpy strain and we get along really good with it. I don't think with these L1Cs it works. And so I think it's important when you think about herd cleanup and immunity. Number one, I'm a big proponent of the POMP program at Iowa State. They'll work with you and they can really help you determine which interventions result in the best outcomes for you. Every herd's different. Maybe you use vaccine, maybe you don't. Maybe you enter a feeder pig gilt, maybe you enter a bred gilt. But there's going to be different outcomes that might be a little more important for different producers, and you can look at those and what works. From a disease elimination standpoint, I think you got to look at giving yourself a good chance to be successful. If you're going to do a herd closure, obviously you want it to be successful at the end. And I think that comes down to following PRRS elimination protocols to a T. But if you do that, you're going to get, like I said, better sow farm performance, huge improvements in downstream mortality throughout that closure and especially afterwards. And I think you need to set those up to not disrupt your throughput in your sow farm for at least 50 weeks. It seems to be what it takes to me to clean them up. And so we load them up now. We'll put additional gilts in 8 weeks after the original LVI those gilts, and then shut the doors until the end of that closure. And by doing that and starting a breed project with negative gilts off-site around 36 weeks in, we can get to about 51 weeks and have no disruption or gilt flow, which helps make it feasible to pull off. And we'll get healthier pigs, better sow farm performance. We don't disrupt our parity structure, and we keep the same throughput through our herds. And then measuring it. So I kind of stole this concept from Joel Neerum, but I've got farms baked into gold, silver, and bronze, and then I guess we'll call them Olympic hopefuls. But this is, with the disease status, kind of PRRS, myco, and then some of our endemic bacteria. I kind of went through our data and some literature to come up with what getting from up everything into the silver or above category. And when I started, we had about $50 million of disease opportunity in our system. And so I just update that with where our status of our herds are. And the last one here, we were about 39 million. But I think it's a good benchmark to show you where your opportunities are to get to. Just from a wean to finish standpoint, it's really pretty similar. Biosecurity discussion, PRRS break response, and then preparing that site for the next group of pigs so you don't break the next set because you didn't get your barn prepared or cleaned up. I think I'm getting down to the nitty gritty, so I'll just kind of get through the wean to finish stuff pretty quick. But I think from a biosecurity standpoint, communication is important. And then getting out with people, you can get out with the farm staff and talk to them about it, but I met with all of our finishing maintenance guys last spring, and I found out some of the sites they needed ladders at, they didn't have them. They're taking their ladders around to work on feed lines into site after site after site. So sometimes just getting out and communicating with people, vaccination crews is another good example, and making sure they understand which sites are PRRS positive, which sites are PRRS negative. And I just use an example of, this would be a quick, easy tool that we have programmed into ours. And I know there's a lot of technology out there too to utilize in terms of helping people go in the right order between sites. And then some critical timeframes. Iowa State and University of Minnesota both have really good data on the risk of pumping season and when sites are pumped and the spread of disease around that time frame. So making sure that's right. And I've heard discussions around 50% plus mortality groups from lateral PRRS breaks in the nursery. Make dang sure in that early wean to finish period, biosecurity is very good. And we do we test every group before we undouble stock and sequence the virus there so we understand what's going on and where the risks are at. One thing I'll just mention real quick on the response plan is we've kind of moved into using macrolides. So with some of the cost reductions and some of the antibiotics, oftentimes if we have a lateral PRRS break, we'll come in with telithromycin, and then on the backside when that's worn off, run tilamicocin. And I think that there's a lot of data around what a macrolide will do as far as apoptosis versus necrosis and how that results in cytokine inflammation in the lungs and that severe pneumonia and the death that occurs because of that. And then we've got a health case ticket system where it's kind of like telemedicine. It's basically Microsoft Forms that they fill out. They can attach pictures of what's going on, and then the vet can go in and fill out that in that shared file response plans after conversations. And then when you go back 2 weeks later, you can follow up until you close that case out. And that allows you to have that follow-up, but also allows you to kind of see. I can't remember what I did yesterday, much less a week ago. So it helps me go back and, oh yeah, that's what we did on that group of pigs. And then the other thing I'll say is preparing for the next group of pigs. You've got to get your barn cleaned, especially in the wintertime. One thing we started doing was dyeing our disinfectant. And when we did that, we saw our wash crews doing a good job disinfecting our barns. I'm colorblind, but supposedly you can see the dye on the slats there. But we did some trials with it, made sure the disinfectant was still effective, but we would just put 10 ounces of concentrated that pig marking dye, that you'd mix up and use for market hogs, 10 ounces of that in a gallon of disinfectant, and that seems to have worked pretty well for us. And then other things you don't think about, like measuring your pits from the outside pump outs rather than from down in the slats and dragging stuff back up into the barn right away. And stay away from that. Make sure that mortality has been picked up. Rendering companies tend to get behind, and we've had a lot of times we have dead pigs still left on the site from the prior turn. Making sure that they get picked up and keep guys away from the dead box. Wear segregated boots, do it at the end of the day. I think when it comes to that and transportation, making sure your wean pig transportation is ideal, and the drivers and everybody, because when you get those nursery groups that break, it just kills you. And so those would be the key things that I would focus on from a preparing for wean pig standpoint. And I think that's all I got for you guys.